What was the ER department like at Stanford? What are the sort of things you have to deal with in a standard shift?
So my role is a little unique in that I kind of survey what's going on in the department and I watch to see if there are people who are kind of standing out to me as sicker than others. And then I touch base with the nurses and the physicians and see if there's anything I can do to help. So in the last 24 hours, we had a couple of patients who transferred in from outside hospitals for the specialty services we have at Stanford. Most of them with low blood pressure, one with a traumatic eye injury. It was just kind of a typical night in the emergency department. Very exciting always, but that's what we were working on last night.
Right. And in those typical nights, I'm using air quotes there because I'm not sure if there is such a thing for those of us who've never stepped in there or who have accidentally stepped in there on a gurney. How often would you get to a point where it's like, okay, this is actually life critical. We could lose a human being here?
I would say at an emergency department the size of Stanford, every night we have those moments where your stomach sort of flips over and you're like, oh, we need to be here now. We need to move a little bit faster. We need to go a little bit harder on this one. And the key is to try and recognize them early or hope that somebody has recognized it early. And if it's late in the game, then we usually are scrambling to get our feet underneath us and hopefully turn things around if we can.
Oh.
Yeah. Patty, let me give you a perspective as well.
Yeah, go ahead.
The emergency department is the size of a football field, literally. And so the format at Stanford, for instance, is that our critical care area, it fluctuates from, it's not fixed in one part of the emergency department, although one area tend to receive a lot of the resuscitation, which highlights the role of Sara, for instance. They are really trying to sniff out the critical care patients in the entire football zone. And so they're not just isolated in one corner of that football field. They have to track all of the patients in our board to see if any of the vital signs are really heading towards critical area. And then the team that Sara runs will then kind of jump in and say, hey, what's going on here? What can we do? What can we help? And that's the model of our critical care team in the emergency department at Stanford.
Yeah, and that's a really good tangible reference point there, the size of a football field. Like, imagine, I'm already picturing trying to run from one end zone to the other.
And I don't run. So I'm usually in one zone. So I run maybe like an eighth of that zone. And Sara's team, they're flexible. They go from different places. And that's why when I mentioned earlier that when we get those resuscitation, it is such a breath of fresh air. When I see faces like Sara, it's like, oh, this is going to be a great resuscitation.
I will tell you, though, if I were to ever see you running Dr. Alvarez, I wouldn't even need to know what would be happening.
Exactly.
Right behind you. There's not a lot that makes us run in the emergency department. I think on the TV shows, it looks like we run all the time. But the truth is when people see people running for like no reason, we're like, why are you running?
Why are you running? Yeah, exactly.
That's a really, really important point. How much is that a natural inbuilt part of an emergency physician or a nurse or any staffer who's there? Like my sister is the head of the emergency department at Royal Melbourne Hospital. And so I have some idea of her countenance. Her natural state as a human is pretty laid back. She's pretty chill. She's very no worries, like it's going to be okay. And she carries that into her work. She's actually been featured on a reality TV show back in Australia. No one here will know, but I've seen her work and she's very calm. But I assumed watching her that's very much like, oh, that must be what it takes to become a emergency medicine professional. Do you have people turn up early days in the program, whether they're junior doctors or junior nurses, and they want to run because they either think that that's what you're supposed to do or that's their natural reaction, and you have to beat that out of them, for a better word?
Yeah, I think we're in a training facility, and so we see a lot of this earlier on. I think it manifests a lot better or to an extreme when we're in a resuscitation because either they're speaking faster, they're asking a lot of orders pretty quickly, or you just see them running towards the trauma bay when everybody's like just walking. And we do remind them, it's like, why are we running? What is going on? Oftentimes when I see running, like Sara was mentioning, I have to cue into, is there a resuscitation that I'm missing? Was I not called to go into that room? Because oftentimes I do have a good handle either by just global listening to the entire department, the entire football field. I think the more senior you become, that's a skill that you develop to simply listen in, the running, the commotion that's happening, similar to what Sara was mentioning earlier of like going from one place to another.
You do have to tell people though. And I think that is part of like the cultural indoctrination in our community is that you tell people, jokingly the first time, like, hey, how are you going to give orders if you're short of breath when you show up in this room? Like, don't run. And then, the next time you sit down and practically say, like, if you run, that kind of increases our operational tempo to a point where we may not be functional. So we need you to dial that back a little bit so that people don't get amped up with you.
And I've actually had that example. So when I trained in the Bronx at Jacobi, and the other hospital, Montefiore, we had to cover the block perimeter outside of the emergency department, which means that if there's somebody who passes out or has a seizure outside, like just in front of the lobby, we have to bring our equipment all the way to the other side of that hospital to pick up the patient and bring them back to the emergency department. In my very early days, I was that person that would you go to emergency medicine as well because of the rush, the adrenaline thing that happens with all of this excitement. But then I realized that no matter how fast you run to those places, if you really are so short of breath, like I remember carrying the oxygen tank, and they're not light. And so imagine running like half a mile and then you get
and just for anyone who isn't seeing a video and they're just listening, LA, you're not a big man either. That's fair to say.
I can normally run, but I don't run that far. And when I
with an oxygen tank
and the adrenaline, right? You're in your mind, you're also thinking out loud, like, what am I going to get? Because the notion of emergency medicine, we don't really know what's going to arrive to us. Everybody arrives with a little bit of information, and we have to make critical decision based on those. And so in my mind, I'm already trying to figure out, like, what if they need X, Y, Z, and what resources do I have? And the point of me sharing this is that by the time I get there, even though my mind is running pretty fast, I'm working to slow down my breathing because I cannot think, right? Like I'm blacking out. Literally, I'm like tunnel visioning because I'm out of breath. And so I think for me, that's when I first learned that there's no running in the emergency department. It's not like one of those TV shows where it's cool to run. It's actually not cool to run.